Did you know that one of the most controversial figures in the Bible not only deceived his own brother, but also tricked his father to secure a divine blessing? And what's even more astonishing is that God chose him to lead an entire nation. The story of Jacob, the man who wrestled with God and emerged transformed, challenges everything we believe about forgiveness, redemption, and divine purpose. How can someone with such a complicated past become the patriarch of the 12 tribes of Israel? The answer will both surprise you and reshape your understanding of God's grace. Join our Faith and Transformation community. Like the video and subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on future inspiring messages. In the ancient lands of Canaan lived Isaac and Rebekah, heirs of the divine promise given to Abraham, the father of faith. Although they enjoyed God's blessing, they faced a challenge that tested their faith: Rebekah's infertility. For years, they prayed fervently, seeking divine intervention. Finally, God answered their prayers in an extraordinary way. Rebekah not only became pregnant, but carried within her the beginning of a pivotal chapter in the history of the people of Israel. Rebekah's pregnancy was complicated from the start. She felt a constant struggle within her, something she couldn't understand. Desperate, she sought God for answers. The Lord revealed that she was carrying 2 nations in her womb, 2 peoples that would always be at odds. The revelation was even more astounding. The older would serve the younger. This message defied traditional customs of primogeniture, but declared God's sovereign plans. When the time came for the birth, the first to emerge was Esau. His appearance was unusual, with reddish skin and a thick covering of hair earning him his name. However, his younger brother Jacob was not far behind. As he was born, he held Esau's heel tightly, as if already contending for his place. This gesture was no coincidence. It foreshadowed the dynamics that would define their relationship and the fate of their descendants. Isaac and Rebekah watched in awe as the differences between their sons became more evident as they grew. Esau became a skilled hunter, passionate about the outdoors. In contrast, Jacob was more reserved, preferring household tasks and forming a close bond with his mother. This duality in their personalities became the axis of numerous family conflicts, which began shaping the narrative of God's divine plan. Jacob's birth marked the beginning of a journey filled with trials and promises. Unbeknownst to him, he was destined to become the patriarch of a nation, a man whose life would reflect the complexity of human nature and God's transformative grace. Thus began the story of 2 brothers whose rivalry would not only impact their family, but also shape the destiny of entire nations. The next major test for Jacob came with a unique opportunity: the birthright. Time passed, and Isaac and Rebekah's sons grew up with distinct traits and markedly different futures. Esau, the firstborn, was strong and rugged, devoted to hunting and the wilderness. Jacob, on the other hand, was introspective, a man who cherished home and spirituality, close to his mother, and seemingly more attuned to the divine promises surrounding his family. This contrast not only highlighted their personalities, but also foreshadowed the paths they would eventually take. One day, Esau returned utterly exhausted from one of his hunting trips. His hunger was so overwhelming that he seemed willing to do anything for a hot meal. Jacob, ever observant and shrewd, recognized an opportunity. He prepared a lentil stew, its aroma filling the air. Esau, desperate, begged for a portion of the food. Jacob, aware of the spiritual and societal significance of the birthright, made a startling proposal. "I'll give you this stew if you sell me your birthright." Esau, blinded by his immediate needs, scoffed and said, "What good is a birthright to me if I'm about to die of hunger?" Without hesitation, he agreed to the trade. With this impulsive decision, Esau disregarded an eternal legacy for a fleeting moment of satisfaction. Although the exchange seemed informal, its implications were profound. Jacob revealed himself to be not only cunning, but also someone who deeply valued divine blessings. Esau, on the other hand, exposed his impulsive nature and lack of regard for God's promises. This event marked the beginning of an even deeper divide between the brothers. What appeared to be a simple transaction would eventually escalate tensions between them. The real battle for the blessing was yet to come, and Jacob was prepared to go to great lengths to secure it. The strain between Jacob and Esau soon intensified, but the next chapter of their story would bring their relationship to a breaking point. Isaac, now elderly and with failing eyesight, sensed that his time on earth was drawing to a close. He wished to bless Esau, his firstborn, as was customary at the time, ensuring his prosperity and familial leadership. He summoned Esau and asked him to hunt and prepare a special stew, his favorite dish, before receiving the blessing. Esau eagerly agreed, unaware that another plan was unfolding. Rebekah, overhearing the conversation, recalled God's words, "The older will serve the younger." Trusting in this revelation, she decided to intervene to ensure Isaac's blessing would fall upon Jacob. She called her younger son in secret and revealed her plan. Jacob was to disguise himself as Esau to receive the blessing before his brother returned. Although initially hesitant, fearing he might be discovered, his mother persuaded him to take the risk. Rebekah prepared a stew similar to the one Isaac had requested and dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes, infused with his distinctive scent of the outdoors. She also covered Jacob's arms and neck with goat skins to mimic his brother's rough skin. With the plan set, Jacob approached his father. "Are you Esau?" Isaac asked suspiciously. "Yes, I am," Jacob replied, doing his best to mimic his brother's voice. Although doubtful, Isaac touched Jacob's arms and, feeling the rough skin, became convinced. After tasting the stew, he blessed Jacob with words that would shape his destiny: prosperity, leadership, and dominance over his enemies. When Esau returned and discovered what had happened, his rage was overwhelming. In tears, he pleaded with his father for another blessing, but Isaac explained that he had already given the best to Jacob. Esau's indignation turned to hatred, and he vowed to kill his brother after their father's death. Rebekah, fearing for Jacob's life, urged him to flee to the house of his uncle Laban in Haran. She promised it would be a temporary refuge, but Jacob's exile would last for many years. Before he left, Isaac, now fully aware of the divine plan, blessed Jacob again, sending him off with the hope that he would find a wife among his relatives and prosper under God's protection. And so, Jacob left his home, burdened by the weight of his deceit and the fear of retribution. However, on his journey to Haran, he would have a transformative encounter that would renew his relationship with God and prepare him for the future. The journey to Haran was long and solitary. Jacob, fleeing from Esau's wrath, carried the weight of his actions and uncertainty about what lay ahead. As he traveled, he likely reflected on the deception he had committed and the potential consequences. Yet God, faithful to his plan, had prepared a special moment to restore hope in Jacob's heart. One night, weary from his travels, Jacob found a place to rest. Using a stone as a pillow, he lay down under the starry sky. As he slept, he had an extraordinary dream. He saw a ladder stretching from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending, carrying out God's work. At the top stood the Lord, who spoke directly to Jacob. "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac. The land on which you are lying I will give to you and your descendants. Your offspring will be as numerous as the dust of the earth, spreading to the north, south, east, and west. Through you and your descendants all the families of the earth will be blessed. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will not leave you until I have fulfilled what I have promised you." When Jacob awoke, he was filled with awe and reverence. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was unaware of it," he exclaimed. He named the place Bethel, meaning house of God, and set up the stone as a pillar, a lasting reminder of that divine encounter. There, he made a vow. If God protected him and brought him back safely, he would be his God, and Jacob would honor his name. With renewed faith and hope, Jacob continued his journey to Haran, unaware that the next chapter of his life would bring both love and challenges in the house of his uncle Laban. Jacob arrived in Haran with a heart full of uncertainty, but his encounter with Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, would change the course of his life. While resting near a well, he saw a young woman approaching with a flock of sheep. Rachel, with her beauty and grace, immediately captivated Jacob. Driven by a mix of excitement and courtesy, Jacob removed the stone covering the well and helped water the flock. When he introduced himself as Laban's nephew, the young woman hurried to inform her family. Laban welcomed Jacob with warmth and enthusiasm. Recognizing Jacob's diligence, Laban offered him a place to stay and work. After a month, Laban asked, "What should your wages be?" Jacob, deeply in love with Rachel, replied without hesitation, "I will work 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban agreed to the arrangement, and thus began a period of hard labor for Jacob. The 7 years felt like just a few days to Jacob because of his deep love for Rachel. However, the joy he anticipated turned into disappointment on his wedding night. Laban, in an act of cunning, substituted Rachel with his older daughter, Leah. In the darkness of the bridal tent, Jacob did not realize the deception until the next morning. Furious, he confronted Laban, who justified his actions by explaining that in their culture, the elder daughter must marry first. Laban proposed a solution. Jacob could also marry Rachel, but in exchange, he would need to work another 7 years. Motivated by his love, Jacob agreed to the terms. Thus he married Rachel, but the rivalry between the two sisters would define the family dynamics for years to come. During his time with Laban, Jacob proved to be an exceptional shepherd, significantly increasing his uncle's flocks. Aware of the blessings Jacob brought to his household, Laban tried to keep him in service with agreements that always favored himself. However, Jacob, with God's guidance, used his knowledge and resourcefulness to prosper and secure his own wealth. As Jacob worked for Laban, his family grew significantly. Leah, though not his favored wife, bore several sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Seeing that she could not conceive, Rachel offered her maidservant Bilhah to Jacob, who fathered 2 more sons, Dan and Naphtali. Leah, feeling overlooked, also gave her maidservant Zilpah to Jacob, resulting in the birth of Gad and Asher. Finally, God blessed Rachel, and she gave birth to Joseph, Jacob's favored son. This period was not without strife. The rivalries between his wives and Laban's greed tested Jacob's patience. Despite these challenges, Jacob thrived, becoming a wealthy man with large flocks, servants, and a growing family. After years of labor, family tensions, and hardships, Jacob felt it was time to return to the land God had promised him. Yet he would face new conflicts before reclaiming the destiny assured to him at Bethel. As the years passed, Jacob's family expanded, forming the foundation of what would eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. This process, however, was not without internal discord, particularly due to the rivalry between Leah and Rachel, Jacob's 2 wives. Each sought to gain their husband's favor, competing through the number of children they could bear him. Leah, though less loved, was the first to give birth. Her sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, secured her place in the family. Meanwhile, Rachel, desperate over her own infertility, turned to her maidservant Bilhah, who bore 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Not wanting to be left behind, Leah also gave her maidservant Zilpah to Jacob, who bore him Gad and Asher. This cycle of competition shaped Jacob's domestic life, creating tensions that would linger for generations. Finally, God answered Rachel's prayers, and she conceived. Joseph was born, becoming Jacob's favored son, a reflection of his deep love for Rachel. Later, Rachel gave birth to another son, Benjamin, but this tragic birth resulted in her death. Rachel's loss left a profound void in Jacob's heart, yet Benjamin became a living reminder of his beloved wife. During this time, Jacob's relationship with Laban remained strained. Despite Jacob's hard work to amass wealth and establish his family, Laban continually schemed to keep him under his control. However, With God's guidance, Jacob secured abundant flocks and servants, becoming a prosperous man. The formation of the 12 tribes not only signified the growth of Jacob's family, but also the fulfillment of God's promise that his descendants would be as numerous as the dust of the earth, spreading in all directions. Each son held a vital role in Israel's future, from Judah, the ancestor of kings, to Joseph, whose extraordinary destiny would soon unfold. Although Jacob had prospered in Haran, he knew he couldn't remain there forever. The promised land called to him, but the journey back would be fraught with danger. He would need to face both Laban and Esau, two men with whom he had unresolved matters. The next chapter of his life would bring him face to face with both his past and with God. The time to leave came when Jacob felt God's call to return to Canaan. Leaving Laban's household, however, would not be simple. Despite years of loyal service, distrust marred their relationship. Laban was unwilling to let Jacob go without gaining something in return. Aware of Laban's manipulative nature, Jacob decided to leave secretly. He gathered his family, flocks, and all his possessions, embarking on the journey to the promised land. When Laban discovered his departure, he assembled his men and pursued Jacob. A confrontation seemed inevitable, but God intervened, warning Laban in a dream not to harm Jacob. When they finally met, Laban accused Jacob of theft. Weary of the constant accusations, Jacob passionately defended his integrity, recounting his years of hard labor and how God had blessed him despite Laban's exploitation. After a lengthy discussion, they agreed to a peace treaty. They erected a heap of stones as a witness to their pact, and Laban returned to his home. Though he had resolved the conflict with Laban, Jacob knew his greatest challenge still lay ahead. Reuniting with Esau filled him with dread. Before facing his brother, however, Jacob would experience a life-altering encounter, a face-to-face meeting with God. As Jacob neared Canaan, his fear of meeting Esau grew. He remembered his brother's vow of revenge and worried about the safety of his family. As a precaution, he sent messengers bearing gifts to Esau, hoping to placate his anger. The messengers returned with news that Esau was approaching with 400 men, heightening Jacob's anxiety. That night, after sending his family across the Jabbok River, Jacob remained alone. It was then that a mysterious man appeared and began wrestling with him. The struggle was fierce, lasting until dawn. Jacob realized this was no ordinary man, but a divine messenger, possibly God himself in human form. Even when the man touched Jacob's hip and dislocated it, Jacob clung to him with unwavering determination. "I will not let you go unless you bless me," Jacob declared, showing both his determination and his understanding that this struggle was more than physical. It was spiritual. The man replied, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." With this blessing, Jacob received a new name that symbolized his transformation. He was no longer the cunning deceiver, but someone who had confronted God with humility and perseverance. Though he limped from his injury, his heart was renewed. He had found a new identity and a reaffirmation of God's promises. With his new name and a renewed trust in God, Jacob prepared to face Esau. This impending meeting would define not only his relationship with his brother, but also his ability to reconcile with his past. As dawn broke, Jacob, now called Israel, moved forward to meet Esau. He organized his family into groups, placing the maidservants and their children at the front, followed by Leah and her children, and finally Rachel and Joseph at the rear. He himself went ahead, bowing to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother, a gesture of humility and repentance. To Jacob's surprise, Esau ran to him, not with anger, but with open arms. He embraced Jacob and wept, putting years of bitterness behind them. Overwhelmed, Jacob recognized God's grace in this reconciliation. "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God," he said, grateful for the forgiveness and restoration of their relationship. Esau accepted Jacob's gifts and offered to accompany him on his journey, but Jacob, aware of the need to move at his own pace, politely declined. The brothers parted ways, but peace between them was restored. With the family conflict resolved, Jacob set out for the Promised Land, where new challenges awaited and where he would reaffirm his commitment to God, marking the beginning of a new chapter in his life. With his reconciliation with Esau behind him, Jacob finally entered the land God had promised. His arrival in Canaan was filled with deep emotion and reflection. This was the place he had fled years before while escaping his brother, and now he returned as a transformed man with a large family and a renewed faith. Jacob settled near Shechem, where he purchased a plot of land and built an altar, naming it El Elohe Israel, meaning God, the God of Israel. This act symbolized his acknowledgement that the land was not only a physical inheritance, but also a spiritual one, a reminder of God's faithfulness throughout his life. However, not all was peaceful in Canaan. One of the darkest events occurred when Dinah, Leah's daughter, was violated by Shechem, the son of the region's ruler. This led to a violent conflict, as Jacob's sons Simeon and Levi avenged their sister by killing the men of the city and looting their possessions. Although Jacob condemned their actions, he feared the repercussions this might bring to his family in a land surrounded by hostile peoples. Amid these challenges, God spoke to Jacob again, calling him to return to Bethel and renew his commitment. Jacob obeyed, purging his family of all idolatry and building another altar. This act reaffirmed his trust in God's promises and his desire to live under divine guidance. Despite conflicts and losses, Jacob continued advancing in his spiritual and familial journey. His legacy was beginning to take shape, though internal tensions within his family would still test his faith and leadership. Jacob's life in Canaan was marked by increasing tension within his family, especially among his sons. Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, held a special place in Jacob's heart. This favoritism was evident to all, particularly when Jacob gave Joseph a richly ornamented robe, a symbol of his preference. This act provoked jealousy and resentment among his brothers. Joseph, gifted with prophetic dreams, shared visions suggesting that one day his brothers and even his parents would bow before him. These revelations only fueled the animosity of his brothers, who began plotting against him. One day, while Joseph was visiting his brothers in the field, they attacked him and threw him into a pit. Then, in an act of cruelty and greed, they sold Joseph to a group of Ishmaelite traders heading to Egypt. To cover up their actions, the brothers stained Joseph's tunic with animal blood and brought it to Jacob, who assumed that a wild beast had killed his son. The loss of Joseph plunged Jacob into profound grief. For years, he lived under the sorrow of losing his favorite son, unaware of the destiny God had planned for him. Though Jacob believed he had lost Joseph forever, God was silently working behind the scenes, orchestrating a plan that would not only transform Joseph's life, but also shape the future of the entire family of Israel. Years passed, and Jacob's life reached its later stages. During this time, God orchestrated an event that would forever change his family's story, the reunion with Joseph. When a severe famine struck the region, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt in search of food. There, to their astonishment, they discovered that Joseph was not only alive, but had become the second in command in Egypt, overseeing the kingdom's resources. The reunion with Joseph was a moment of joy and restoration for Jacob. He could now see how God had used suffering to fulfill his purpose. Grateful, Jacob brought his entire family to Egypt, where Joseph provided them with refuge and sustenance in the land of Goshen. In his final days, Jacob gathered his sons to bless them, speaking prophetic words over each of them. To Judah, he gave the promise of leadership, from whom the royal line and ultimately the Messiah would come. To Joseph, he granted a double portion of blessing, acknowledging his pivotal role in preserving the family. Each blessing reflected the character and destiny of each son, ensuring that Israel's identity would carry on through them. Jacob died in Egypt, surrounded by his sons, but he requested to be buried in Canaan, in the cave of Machpelah, alongside Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. His funeral was a solemn occasion that brought the entire family together, marking the end of an era. Jacob's life, filled with triumphs and trials, was a testimony to the power of God's grace. From a cunning young man fleeing his home to the patriarch who blessed a forming nation, his story illustrates God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises, even through the greatest challenges. Now that you've learned the incredible story of Jacob, a man who transformed from a shrewd deceiver into God's chosen patriarch, what lessons can you apply to your own life? This is only the beginning of a journey filled with divine teachings that can transform the way you view God's plans for you. Don't stop with this story, because there's so much more to discover in God's Word. Stories that inspire, challenge, and renew faith. If this video touched your heart, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs this message. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more life-changing content. See you in the next video, where together we will continue growing in faith and hope.